And we're rolling here on YouTube. We apologize for the lateness. We had a technical issue that had to be dealt with. And just verifying, yes, we are up. And this is our fantastic 50th show. It's from this point forward will be called the 50th. See, and now I'm screwing up. There we go. Sorry about that. It's just a plethora of failures on my part. Here at the show. But from this point forward, this shall be referred to as the Super Bowl bug. So anybody has any issues with doing a YouTube broadcast, it's the Super Bowl bug that can affect you. But you're going to see us downgraded just a little bit because we're just eliminating some points of failure on our system. I'll bring Alex in as our tech expert. He has been going crazy for the last hour trying to determine what the problem was. Alex, are you calming?
I'm here.
Namaste? Are you ready to go?
Yeah, it's no fun when things break down. So we are 1080p streaming in terms of resolution instead of our usual 4K. Like Mitch said, we're not using our usual system. So I'm going to say it probably has something to do with an operating system patch that went wrong, possibly some API updates that broke something. Because the app keeps crashing. So unfortunately, we weren't able to live stream from our usual platform. It won't look as sharp. It won't have all the fancy graphics, but we're still here. So appreciate your patience. For anyone watching now, I can see a few people in the chat. So thank you very much for sticking around for today's show. We'll try to make the best of it for episode 50 of The Last Angry DJ.
Yeah, congratulations to us. And some things are still working. I can still pop my lower third in and tell you who I am. Mitchell Casey Hill from the old radio days doing the older boomer stuff, and Alexander, who's doing the more younger millennial, and our consultant and radio expert, Mr. Mark Giuliani. Mark, how are you today?
How are you guys doing? I'm doing well.
Well, we're scurrying through the technical. You know, it must be there's only so much technical expertise that's available on Super Bowl Sunday, and it's being sucked into some vortex, and it's drawing stuff out of our system. So we're back to the normal Zoom kind of thing. So that's where we are. So here's how we celebrate our 50th anniversary show of 50. Maybe it's bodes for the future, how things go. But we're going to get the show out there. That's the determination and expectations of us that the show must go on. So we will do always our very best to bring you a program, maybe with a lot less glitz, but the same just witty, strikingly interesting commentary. We're going to ask and answer questions. So if you have questions, Alex is going to explain how to get to us. Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mitch. And I just want to say, just for episode 50, we have a number of topics that we're going to be talking about that we've been thinking about through the last week or so. But if you have any questions, you can right now, and I'm going to say it slowly, and I'm going to wait for you to go there, ask.thelastangrydj.com. That's ask.thelastangrydj.com. Okay?
Oop,
You got
sorry.
that? Okay, go there right now because that's where you can post your questions for episode 50.
And we do already have some questions, which is, I guess people sat there waiting for us to come on and said, I'm just going to ask questions until they push the on-air button, and on they come. So there we go. Sorry about the sound effect. I forgot that it will immediately draw attention to my smiling face. So what we can do. Before we get into questions about the 50th anniversary, it's Super Bowl Sunday. I know you're not supposed to say that. And Mark and I were talking a little bit before the show started, and Alex was scurrying about dealing with technical Boffins stuff. What is the big deal with not being able to say the word Super Bowl? Apparently, it's an intellectual property violation every time I say it, but if Mark says it, it's not. How does that work, Mark? How is it that you can say it, I can't?
In context, our radio station can say it because we're subscribed with Westwood One or Premiere or whomever is bringing it. I think it's Westwood One, and so we're rebroadcasting the Super Bowl. So the way the rules work, we can use the term when we're promoting the fact that we're going to be rebroadcasting the Super Bowl.
Oh,
but
I
our
knew Norm
advertisers
Paddott's.
can't.
Does that count? The
What's
fact
that?
I knew Norm. I used to know Norm Paddott's. Does that count?
No.
Okay, he used to run Westwood. Before it was Westwood, it was like I think ABC or something, and they got all the ABC properties, and The rest is history, as they say. So the other thing we were talking about that was interesting, and we'll get this out of the way real fast, but hey, it is Super Bowl Sunday. Super Bowl commercials. Now, there's a pro and con opinion that's flying here, and Alex, you can jump in too, but Mark and I were arguing about it, and my point about Super Bowl spots, they're very entertaining and interesting to see, but as an advertiser, somebody that produces advertising, why is it that they don't even talk about the product sometimes or even mention the product in order to do something clever? I think that what happens is they've got these creative types sitting in offices in New York and Chicago and LA, wherever else, and they're just thinking, what can we do to get a lot of attention and win me a Clio, but not necessarily be good for my client? And my client's going to drop a few $1 million into the bucket. Why is that considered to be a successful ad campaign when you don't even sell product, but you do get interest? How's that work, Mark?
Well, I just don't think that that's the goal of being on the Super Bowl as a commercial. I mean, first of all, it's costing $8 million. That's just for the 30-second spot, and then it's $8 million every time that ad runs. That's just the cost to buy the time. You've got a bunch of money you're putting into the production. It may be more than the $8 million to develop the ad, to have the ad produced, to have the, to put it through all the production that it has to go through before it even gets to the TV. So it's really about brand awareness, because even when you add all those numbers up, it's still a really low cost per impression because of the number of people, 120 people watching it today. So totally.
120, that's it?
Yeah, well, I'm
we have
just
more
saying,
listeners on our show than the Super Bowl does.
120 million?
Oh, million. They're with an M. Okay, got it. 120 million people are watching. Okay, but I get what you're saying, but some of those commercials are so clever and well done that they don't even mention the product that they represent. You're supposed to guess what it is. So to me, that's a gigantic miscarriage of justice for advertising. So it's like, if you're going to award kudos to an advertiser on Super Bowl, I think it should be one that sells product. That's,
Well,
my old
let's talk about some of the old Super Bowl commercials. Look at the old Clydesdale commercials. What brand had the Clydesdales featured in it?
It's the one where you have to drink that horse piss or whatever it is. What's it
All
called?
right,
Budweiser?
well, but you remember it, right?
I remember.
What about the
drinking
famous
horse piss,
commercial
you bet.
where all the business people were walking off the edge of a cliff?
Well, it's a Lemmings spot. I think that might have been an Apple commercial.
Yes. See?
And
So
before
it
that,
does
the
work.
1984 ad.
That's right.
Yeah, but after the fact, I know that it was talking about George Orwell and Big Brother, and it was a very successful campaign. But it did sell the Apple computer. It showed it, and it showed the woman with the thing and throwing it like Wonder Woman, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, there's a lot of famous ads after the fact. But during the Super Bowl, when you see some of these spectacular ads, even funny, they're usually funny, I'm like scratching my head saying, did that really sell the product? Did it make me want to run out and grab another bag of Doritos or suck down another liter of Pepsi or Coke?
Well, I
that's
think,
just
Mitch, I just want to push back a little bit, because I think
please.
that it's very easy, and I've written ads before. It is very easy to talk about the actual product that you're trying to sell. I think it takes a lot more work, and I've tried to write ads where you don't directly address the product or talk about it. And I think that does take more work. I think that takes more creativity, and I think it does absolutely help sell the brand. Now, I will say, maybe it's one thing if you're Coca-Cola or a well-established brand where you can get away with that. Probably would be a little bit harder if you're a new company and nobody knows your product at all. So you might have to directly show the product and talk about it and mention the name. But I think established companies, I think it's kind of cool to do an ad that doesn't really seem like an ad, but it still supports the brand and their values. It's more than just, you're not just buying that product, that whatever widget they're selling. You're buying into the company as a brand. As it's more of a holistic approach, right? It's do your beliefs align with their beliefs? There's a lot of things going on.
If I see another ad for some boner, medication, it's like they don't directly address it because it would be a very bad taste. But, to see people dancing together and lounging in hot tubs with each other and holding hands, I mean, okay, I get it. They're trying to, stay away from the service. But essentially, you're talking about trying to get a boner when you take this medication. And that's the other thing, is that the whole pharmaceutical industry selling ads or pushing ads out there telling you, ask your doctor. You don't know what the hell's going on. You don't know how to ask your doctor. So it's the same kind of rationale between some of the ads for Super Bowl. If they make you laugh out loud with your buddies, okay, I get it. You're going to be attracted to the brand awareness because it made you laugh. But that doesn't sell the product. And it's another thing like Pepsi and Coca-Cola and other drinks. They don't talk about this is a cool, refreshing drink that quenches your thirst, makes you feel good or bad, whichever the one it may be. They talk about a lifestyle. So, you're drinking, this product, and now you're dancing and having fun and experiencing life and running on hot air balloons, or maybe get a boner. I don't know. And that's the idea of the ad campaign. They don't sell the actual benefits of the product. And I'm an old school advertising guy, and I say that if you're going to run an ad, then run an ad for the benefits of the product that you represent. So
I don't disagree
sorry.
with you. I think there's a lot of poorly written ads, but the ads are trying to get the attention of everybody and outdo each other, and that I think is wrong. I think that if you look at the most successful radio ad, one of the most successful radio ads was about Sir Edmund Hillary climbing to the top of a mountain. Had talked nothing about what the product was that was trying to sell until the very last line, and he looked at his Rolex.
And he said it's boner time.
And that took that one jewelry store that ran that ad from something like $300,000 to $20 million over several years.
Well,
So,
you do bring up a good point, is radio ads have an unlimited picture that they can paint in your head because it's
Right.
just sound effects and
Right.
well-written copy.
and it's about getting a piece of real estate in everybody's mind and about being the top 3 brands that they think about. So if I took you through an exercise and said, give me all of the toothpaste sold in a grocery store, how many do you think the average person could list?
I just want to meet that one doctor out of 9 out of 10 doctors recommend Crest for your dental. Who's that other doctor? Why are they dissenting? I don't know. So I'm sorry, it's a rant. I'm ranting, but it's that time of the year, Super Bowl commercials, and I enjoy them like anybody else. But I don't think that they sell product. That's just my point. And I think Alex's point is well taken. If you're a new upstarting company and you want to get the word out who you are, get your name out there in some clever way. Somehow leave a hint as to what it is that you do or what you're selling, just so that we know what to go looking for.
Like I don't think if we were, let's just put our thinking caps on. If we were to make an ad right now to sell this podcast, and the goal is for people to go out and look for it and subscribe to it, I don't think you could really make an ad about this show without really saying what it is or that it's even a podcast. If you didn't even say the word podcast, I don't think it would really make sense. Do you think?
2 words, boner cream. That would get twice the listeners we have now. All you have to do is put it there in big letters.
Well, we don't want, I'd rather take the ethical approach and explain to people what they're actually getting into.
I think cream says it all. So,
we're not charging any money, so I want to make sure people are getting the right product. But anyway,
Mark, feel free to drop out at any time if I've crossed
I'm
the
out of
line
here.
and crossed the Mendoza line here in commentary. But hey, it's a podcast; you can say whatever you want. So I'm hoping that we're covered. And by the way, are we allowed to curse and say off-color things here, Alex? Do the people at Apple consider us bad content? Do they flag us?
No, they won't. You just need to make sure that your podcast is flagged with that explicit flag, basically.
Are we
So I
flagged?
turned that on. So it's in the RSS feed, in the XML data. If you look at it, if you go to Apple's podcast directory and look up The Last Angry DJ, you're going to see that little E for explicit, like if you were to buy, an actual record that had profanity on it. They have to conform to those laws. Our podcast will have that little E for explicit. And most episodes, we don't really say anything that's could be considered profanity. Once in a
Yeah,
while,
fucking
you
A,
might
man.
throw a
We
word
just
in.
we keep it clean.
Right. So I just leave it on all the time because I never know when Mitch is just going to lose his mind on the show. So
Boner cream. I'm telling you. Put it on your forehead. It grows hair. I'm telling you. Anyhow, that's the end of it. I'm sorry. I promise to be quintessentially controversial, I guess is the best word to say. We do have questions here that are leaking into the show in spite of my content. Mark, do you have any questions
Sure, we
or
sure
comments?
do. So let's start with our first question. If you could start over, how would you start a new radio station in 2025? What technologies would you employ to create more engagement with listeners and appeal to a younger audience?
I'll start, and then I'd like to hear from you guys. Who else am I going to hear from? I think that finding ways to incorporate AI so that you can be hyper local in your presentation is what I would try to do. And I think the low hanging fruit for a news station in any market would be some kind of a talk program, maybe politically motivated. You know, you got to sort of pick a side and start yakking away, and you're going to get, condescending remarks back and forth. So I would say incorporate AI, incorporate your locality to make it hyper local. Mark, you're actually doing it. What would you do?
Well, I think more so than the technology, it's the content and it's being local and bringing up the topics that are important to those people that are within the reach of your radio station. So radio stations are licensed and they have a certain amount of square miles, if you will, that they can reach depending on the wattage of their station. So we're 6,000 watt Class A stations and we can reach about 25-mile radius. And so we know what the topics are that people want to talk about. So we bring experts on our radio shows and we ask them questions and people call in and answer those questions. Our format is talk, news, and sports. So we talk about the sports, we talk about the news, we talk about weather, we talk about Department of Transportation, the schools, all the things that really concern the people who live in the area we reach. And as far as the technology, it's always changing. We're still using some technologies that are 30 years old for the transmitters, for some of the audio boards. So it really just depends on.
Good on you. And
What
I'm
do you
considered
have?
ancient. I'm considered ancient technology too, just so you guys know. I mean, I'm ancient and I'm technology. Alex, what would you do if you had your own radio station and you could do anything you want other than punk country? No punk country, please.
I don't even want to talk about the music. So what I would want to do, and I'm just going to say a bunch of things that will probably not make any sense because I've never owned a radio station. But what I would want to listen to and watch, and speaking of technology that we can use, that we can incorporate to make it more engaging and freshen things up and make it more modern, I would love, first of all, I love talk radio and I love the kind of things that we do on this show. So I think more of that, but also on the hyper local aspect that you brought up, Mitch, is I would love, there's so much going on in the city of Vancouver and the surrounding suburbs. I would love to know more about the city that I live in. And there are certain people that I follow on Instagram who are constantly posting videos of like, oh, I went to this restaurant and these are all the things and you should go, like all the events and amazing restaurants that I haven't gone to in the city. I think something like that, and I would love to incorporate live video and live streaming. I would love to have somebody there in person at the event or at a restaurant talking about it, and that could be the audio could be streamed to the station, but also that could go out to YouTube, so you could have the video component as well, and you can have an audience there asking questions. So I would love to learn more about the city that I live in, because I think the reality is a lot of us are so involved with the day-to-day of our own lives that, unless you really like to get out there and explore, I don't get the opportunity a lot of times. I'm very busy and I don't really, there's a lot that I don't know about the city and so I think that's something that I would be interested in watching and listening to.
I'd be interested in following people with a camera and it's somebody puts you up to it and then you follow them around and catch them doing stuff in public. I think that would be like a fly on the wall. Like,
Right. I think it's a little
I'd
bit
like to
more
follow you
expensive.
around when you go to the movie after the show today. What movie are you going to, by the way?
I'm going to go see Companion because I hear it's amazing.
Ah.
And it's unfortunately not being marketed very well. So not that many people have seen it,
But if you take a camera in there and shoot the screen with your
which you're not
iPhone
supposed
20
to
times,
do, Mitch.
yeah, I know. But if you did that, then we'd at least get a glimpse of the movie, and then we could have a shot of you being taken away in chains by the
Yeah.
FBI. That would be
I
well,
would
it wouldn't
much
be
rather.
the FBI
I
in
I,
Canada.
I think giving a quick out of the theater review would be valuable. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you can do, but having that live component, that live streaming component is going to be more expensive because you're not just broadcasting that back to the station, but if you're going to be live streaming, I mean, look, you need the proper hardware, you need the staff and the crew that know how to operate that stuff. You need things like pep links and live views and all this kind of stuff. That's expensive, and the cellular bonding to make sure that your connection's reliable. So it could be done. Just think the upfront capital to have my dream radio station, my modern reimagining, would be very expensive. And I'm sure Mark
Yeah.
probably has some comments about that.
Well,
Are you out of your mind?
no, it's all resources. It's all how much money can be invested into the resources that it's going to take to do all of that. And so, uh, you know, you've got to think that if you're going to send somebody out on the street, you've got to have somebody back running the board. You've got to have somebody that's going to be on the air. You've got to have somebody monitoring the phones. So it takes a lot of resources, just like it does to do this podcast. It takes a lot of resources to run a radio station correctly. I think one of the things that people, one of our next questions here, if I go on to the next question because it ties
Yeah,
into
please.
this, what lessons have radio station owners learned in 2024? And I think as we came out of COVID, Zoom and all of the tools like Zoom, Teams, and all that had played such an important role getting people through that. And so it started to be used into production. And in production, we're using it all the time now. We bring in, instead of bringing in someone over a phone line, we're bringing them in over a Zoom line because it's cleaner. We don't have a lot of the old POTS lines, and they're not being maintained like they used to. So we've had to go to VoIP, and VoIP isn't always that clear. So we've started to rely on Zoom for that. But I think some of the tools, some of the things to get to the question that they've learned about are the changes in technology, but also there's all of this hoopla about digital. Oh, it's all going to shorts, or it's going to podcast, or it's going to all different, social media. The truth of the matter is that radio is still very strong. And so they're
Right.
relearning the fact that radio reaches so many people that these other mediums don't necessarily reach, and there aren't really good ways to measure it. So
And,
go ahead.
and Mark have, as far as operating expenditures are concerned with radio stations, are things fairly stable? Have you found, when you talk about new technology, has any of the new technology made things more expensive? Has it remained the same, or has new technology in any way, shape, and form made certain things a little bit less expensive to operate?
So I think a lot of the new technologies are making things easier on budgets to operate, in the sense that we've had boards in our main studio that might cost $30,000 as a radio board, and they do a lot of things that a radio station needs. But we're literally looking at taking a Behringer wing and replacing our $30,000 board with a $3,500 board that can do so many more things. And when you bring into that the fact that you can connect it to Dante, and now you can bring in audio from anywhere and almost any device, the amount of money it takes to do that is far less than it was 20 years ago.
And the
Interesting.
other thing is, how is the technology improving the listener or viewing experience? How much? I think the listener doesn't care whether it's digital or analog or whatever, unless you're able to do something phenomenally different.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to know. But I think it's making it easier for them because it's easier on the crew that has to run it. So we're getting better at running it, and we're putting together tighter shows. one of the things we're doing is using the same technology for this that we're doing today on this podcast for questions and answers. We're using it for radio, and it makes the show so much more tighter because the announcer doesn't have to sit there and wait for the phone to ring. The announcer's seeing a constant dialogue going across the screen about the show. So if they're done with one call and there's not another call ready to go, when they have a panelist on, an expert in this subject matter, they can look right at the chat and keep that subject going and keep that show going really tight.
Yeah, cool. Any more questions we can try to answer here?
I just want to say before we get to the next question, please, Mark, no Behringer for mission critical stuff. You should look at the Yamaha consoles, like the DM series, the little DM3 that has Dante built in.
Yeah, get it off your chest, Alex. How about Blackmagic? How do you feel about that for encoding and switching?
You know, I love Blackmagic for certain things. For live streaming and encoding stuff on the internet, absolutely not.
All right.
Never, ever.
There you
Okay.
heard it from our tech
Next
wizard.
question. Does packaging up radio content as a podcast make it any different for the audience? Are they asking for it?
I
You
don't.
guys
I don't
wanna
think
take
it
a stab
does.
at
I think
that?
it's the same. It's the same beast. In fact, I think that podcasting may be the next radio, especially if you're doing talk radio or commentary. It's what's the difference? It's being distributed via a distribution system that gets it everywhere, and the content could be the same either way. So, terrestrial versus streaming is kind of what I hear you saying there.
Here's a big difference. Reach. I'm limited when I just use radio by itself, terrestrial,
25 miles, right?
to the 25 miles unless I'm syndicated. When I do it as a podcast, I'm syndicated basically because
Right.
I can reach anywhere that the internet can reach. So the trick is to use both of them together, and if it's just a pre-recorded podcast, you've taken a lot of the ability to be interactive out of that because it's time delayed. So if you do it live and then you post it later as a podcast, you get the best of both worlds. Now you've got an interactive audience that can call in or that can, reach out with the software and by tying the web into with radio, they're reaching you directly through messaging or whatever. And so that makes it interactive, it makes it live, and then that can be put into a podcast.
Well, in the old days, there was only about three. I think there were three networks out there for radio, and they their power, I guess, over the medium of radio was that they owned the long lines that connected up the North American continent. Long lines were run by Bell Labs or AT&T, and there were phone lines essentially that went from point A to point B. And I think it was ABC, NBC, CBS. There might have been a third. I think Mutual Broadcasting was out there. Eventually, things morphed into what would you say, Westwood One, other companies, and that kind of disappeared from the marketplace because back then that was a big deal because there was no social media, there was no way of distribution, and that was the magic word that you said. The distribution was in the hands of those people that owned those long line networks. Nowadays, everybody can do exactly what the big boys used to do that spent millions of dollars to make it happen. So that limitation has been removed, and I think that's also part of the charm of doing a podcast is that you have an immediate network and immediate audience that's worldwide that you can reach if you choose to do it. Anybody can do it. We can do it. You can do it. You can talk about anything. So in a sense, I think also in addition to distribution and syndication, as you used the word, is that it's becoming so fractionalized to very special interests. Like I bet if you went on there, you could see people that bake blueberry pies. There's probably a whole show based around baking blueberry pies, whereas before it would have been a much broader subject. So it's a very interesting, evolution, and I think that's part of what we're talking about here with these questions. What's the evolution of communication and marketing and advertising and doing radio programming and podcasting? It's all kind of coming together. Any more questions, Mark?
Yes, there are. Are there any radio stations that have created podcast content that have helped grow their brand other than NPR?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
Mark?
I mean, we're in the
Okay.
process of doing it. We're not doing it in that it's a podcast per se. That's, you can find on Apple's system platform or any of the traditional podcasting platforms. But what we're doing with one of our shows is taking it and streaming it, and then taking that stream and bringing it back into our website where everybody can ask the questions and everything. So we're doing it digitally. Is it a podcast? Define for me what a podcast is, and I can answer that. But I hear the term thrown around so much, I'm not sure what exactly defines a podcast today.
Well, that's a good question. In fact, I think it's one of your questions that you're looking at to ask here. What is a podcast, and how would you define that? Well, why don't we start with Alex on that one? What
Sure.
is a podcast?
A podcast, and again, Mark alluded to this, but the term gets thrown around a lot, and technically, a podcast is really, it's a piece of audio that is wrapped inside an XML file that is an RSS feed. Really simple syndication. So that's how that technology, that's how it started. That's how it's still used that way today. Anything that's on YouTube or outside of an RSS feed is not technically a podcast. Now, we often call this a podcast, call it a show, call it a YouTube show. Technically, it's not a podcast. A podcast is something inside that RSS feed. That's very specific format, and then you have a podcast client that fetches the contents of that feed and parses that audio file so that the listener can listen to it. And there's very, very little analytics available via that method. We don't really know anything about the individuals that are downloading, other than simple things like unique download numbers, what location they're in, what part of the country they're in, that kind of thing. Apple now, over the last few years, they have built into their own back end more data, because of course they control their own podcast app that ships with their own iPhones. They ship with the Apple Podcast app. So Apple now is able to give you more information, like how much time do people spend listening to your episode? Do they kind of drop off in the middle of the episode and stop listening? That is proprietary. That is unique to their platform. No other platforms have that kind of data. Spotify has their own thing. Apple has their own thing. But technically speaking, you really don't know that much about people.
Wow. I guess that sums that up.
I want to re-answer the question then. No, we're not doing podcasts because we're not using it the way Alex described it, but we're doing it digitally.
Okay. And we're using video to create the podcast initially, then it turns into audio only. Are we a vodcast or a podcast? Are we technically not what we think we are? And does it matter? I mean, it's going to evolve. It truly is going to evolve. And I know it has pinnings to XML and RSS, and Apple kind of spearheaded that. But the thing with a real podcast is that you subscribe to it via the RSS, and you get it in your inbox, or you get access to it whenever it's released. We're not really like that. We're sort of like a downloadable, go to us in order to get to us kind of scenario. And Alex is the tech guru here. Am I describing this correctly, or am I off base?
I'm sorry, Mitch. I was in the middle of typing something. What was that?
I was asking whether or not you would use the boner cream if it became available on our show.
No comment.
Okay,
no
there
comment.
we go. That was a quick answer.
I'm 42, Mitch. I don't know if you realize that. I'm 42. I know I seem older, but I'm 42.
Is it a problem for you?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Let's move. Let's move on.
That's a tough act to follow, Mark.
Okay. Next question. Can you start a talk radio only station on FM and make it profitable in our modern times?
Well, I think it turned that right back to you, Mark. You're doing it. Are you making money?
Yes.
Okay. How much money? A lot?
We made a penny last year.
A penny? Just one
At
little
least one.
shiny penny?
At least one.
At least one penny. Okay. That's a good way to answer that. So that's a good one. I think we got some YouTubers that are asking questions too. So take a peek over there or making comments about some of the various stuff. So ask questions or make comments. We will field them here on our 50th anniversary show. And it says Zoom here in the corner. So what are you going to do? Anybody? Bueller? Questions?
All right, questions. What radio stations have successful video content? I really admire the uniqueness of KEXP in Seattle. They've built a really nice performance studio and invite all sorts of indie artists. You can check it out at YouTube at KEXP.
Yeah, have any of you you guys familiar with this station?
No. Where is it?
It's in Seattle,
Okay,
and
cool.
yeah. So I've been looking at what they've been doing, and you should really, when you have a moment, check out some of their videos because they built this incredible studio, and it's open to the public. I think you can. It's not always open, but I know you can go in there and have a look at it. But it's really an incredible space, and I don't know what cameras they're using, but they have incredible lighting, and they've just built this great studio for bands to come in and play there. It's got a really cool vibe. Lots of indie artists are going through there. I don't really know any of the bands that are going into that place, but I think it's a really unique place. I haven't seen. I mean, there's no one in Vancouver that's doing this, and I don't know that many radio stations that have spent the time and money to build something like this.
Cool. Mark?
I looked at the posting at the link. It looks very interesting. You know, it is an opportunity that I want to look into further because it's taking the thought of radio and bringing it to the public, but also teaching people how to do different things. So I kind of like the idea that they're trying to do.
Next question.
Next question. What is the most successful radio format today?
Classic hits is the one that's the most successful, but the most listened to might be read on the tails of it is talk radio in its various forms, whether it's news or talk or commentary. Mark,
I really
what
think
do you
it depends on where you are. For instance, the number one station in DC is WTOP, which is 20-minute cycles of news, weather, sports, traffic. Every 20 minutes they kind of
Right.
repeat the same thing because that's the nature of the beast in that town. And you're gonna every few minutes, when the traffic is. You're sitting in the car in rush hour in the morning, you kind of hit the button, go to traffic and weather, and then go back to whatever it was you were listening to. If you get away from the major cities, I would think it's country music. News Talks does very well. It does even better during political, like every 4 years. It does really well because of the election cycle. But I think it just depends where you are.
That's a good statement, but I don't think it is the question. The question is what's the most popular, and country has a very loyal following, always has, and there's various fractionation versions of the ones that play George Strait and the ones that play Beyonce are kind of like where they draw the line. But I kind of like, my feeling is classic hits, which is a very broad description of what the music is. It's like anything post 1970 and anything less than the 90s. That's a huge demographic. So I don't know. I don't have the statistics. It would be a good thing to go ask ChatGPT about using Nielsen as the data source for it. Alex, you have a comment?
I don't really know what the most successful radio station format is today because I don't really. I've said this in the past, but I primarily listen to talk radio. Now I know sports radio is supposedly doing pretty well. I mean, we're talking two different markets. You guys are both in the United States, and I'm in Canada, so there's probably some variances there between between the two countries. Canada's kind of a weird place because it's a very big piece of land, but we don't have as many people, and it's spread out across a lot of provinces. So sometimes it can be really hard to kind of break out. So I don't know what the numbers are in Canada, but for me at least, talk radio is really where I spend my time listening to, and of course, I follow the news, traffic reports, that kind of stuff, because I rely on that as a commuter. So, and I imagine Mark, I mean, you guys do, like, I guess every radio station does traffic and news, right?
I don't know that everyone does. We do, but
Okay.
there's,
Okay.
if there's some music stations that don't bother. So according to Nielsen, this is from ChatGPT. According to Nielsen's data, the most successful television formats. Why did it go to television? Let me redo it.
Go ahead. I dream a genie. That's my answer.
Well, for television, United States and Canada encompass a variety of genres that consistently capture high viewership. In 2023, drama emerged. Let me do radio.
Well, that's interesting that a genre can be more popular than others. Because I'm like, right now, I'm binge watching ER, which had 15 seasons over 30 years. And it's very interesting to see at what point when they were doing all the episodes, they literally jumped the shark. And if you don't know what that means, that's like when the writers get tired of doing the series and they just start doing like crazy things like people being helicoptered in, smuggling guns into the operating room, or ambulances blowing up, and Steve Buscemi's playing a mobster. It's just like, come on. In the beginning, there were some like legitimate stories being told, so it was pretty crazy. Mark?
All right, according to Nielsen's audio listening trends, the most popular radio formats in the United States are, come on, guess.
Classic rock.
News talk, number 1. Number 2 is adult contemporary. Number 3 is country. Number 4 is classic hits. Number 5 is pop contemporary hit radio, CHR. In Canada, the radio listening trends are similar, with formats like news talk, adult contemporary, and country also enjoying a widespread popularity. However, specific rankings can vary based on the regional preferences and demo.
That's a great answer. Alex, you have a comment to that?
I'm not surprised that country music is above rock. A lot of people like country music. Unfortunately, not for me, but a lot of people like it. So I guess you gotta do what sells.
I like punk country. It's a good format, and the punk weather even works for me.
I should say it's not that I don't like all country. I've certainly heard country songs I enjoy. There's certain subgenres of country is a very generic term. It's like when people say heavy metal music. Well, there's a lot of what type of heavy metal? Black metal, speed metal, power metal,
Iron Maiden.
Iron Maiden's power metal. It's that style of music. They're part of the new wave of British heavy metal from the 80s, like Judas Priest. But there's a lot of subgenres, so I'm not going to say I don't like all country music, but it's definitely popular.
Thank you. Mark, another question.
Okay, another question. Who were the radio greats you used to listen to growing up?
Wow, that's a great question. By the way, I put it in there. It relates to something that Alex and I have talked about, and Alex has said, well, I'll let Alex say for himself, but he misses the days when there were big radio personalities out there. And when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, listening to the radio, Wolfman Jack, Charlie Tuna, Dan Ingram, they're legendary names, and they were bigger than life personalities, and they showed it on the radio. But that's not the style of radio anymore. You used to talk down to people and out, like, coming to you from the top of the Empire State Building, it's Z100. That's the way they used to talk. Nowadays, they'd be like, hey, I'm hanging out around the Empire State Building, and what are we doing today? Let's see. It's conversational and companionable. So that's the difference. Alex, how do you feel about the changes in personalities?
Well, there's certainly been changes, like you said, Mitch. I mean, this is getting drilled home very hard at the schools, when people go to broadcast school now, because I've been to broadcast school in the last decade or so, and they really did not want people to contort their voices into what we traditionally think is that big, boomy radio voice. They just want people to talk how they normally talk. And I don't have a problem with that necessarily. My issue is I don't think that many people are interesting. And that's really what it boils down to. And I'll get to that, but to directly answer the question, when I was growing up, and we had him on the show here, Larry Hennessy, made a name for himself on CFox in the 80s and 90s with the Larry and Willie show. And those two guys were absolutely hilarious. The bits that they came up with, I mean, the amount of creativity and work that those guys put into, I mean, it's like they were writing a comedy show. Literally every time they were there, they put a ton of work into that show. Whether they were, from being there in the studio to, doing these events where they would show up and try to get people to come there. I mean, they put a lot of work into what they were doing. And I just don't hear that. And they were edgy. That's the other thing. People were edgy on the radio and they liked pushing boundaries. And now I don't hear that. It's all very safe. It's all very homogenous. Everyone is doing the same kind of thing, and that's just boring.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. It is boring, and it's also safe. It's safe for the owners of groups of radio stations that are syndicating not to have a Howard Stern on that's going to be pushing the edges of decency on the program. He's fine on Sirius XM. He's now been relegated away from terrestrial radio. But in the old days, you know, that was the way you got noticed. You got noticed by being a crazy personality. Like a Wolfman Jack was a once in a lifetime kind of character. And he presented it as the character. And when you saw him in person, he presented as Wolfman Jack. Because I knew Frank, that's his real name. He talked like that. He talked like when you talk to him. If I'm lying, I'm dying. That's the way Wolfman was. And those guys don't exist anymore because morning zoo radio is what you were describing that your guys did. There's a lot of guys that do a lot of that kind of style, but they've toned it down, like Preston and Steve in Philadelphia. There's a number of other guys that are very popular. And I do them disservice by not remembering right off the top of my head. But there are little pockets of personality. And a lot of them, what happens is they get some traction in their local market, and then they get syndicated because obviously the station that owns their show likes to be able to take that let's duplicate that everywhere. You know, they see these little dollar signs going, and that's the way it works. So it's just not popular anymore.
But the other challenge that it had was you always had to outdo yourself every day. So look at somebody like Greaseman. Greaseman,
oh yeah, great.
I mean,
great,
he was
great
constantly, he had many different personas, but he was always trying to do a little bit better and be a little bit more loud each time.
Well, Grease used to tap into a unbelievably large library of. He could go into these bits, pre-programmed bits, where he's on the good ship Grease. And, you know, he worked all his little innuendos into his dialogue. And that was back when you couldn't come right out and say off-color stuff. He had his own little language for it. Like "feelin' rosy" was one of his little terms that he used. And when he beat that, you know, he made all these crazy sound effects. By the way, I've tried to get him on the show, and his handlers have so far stopped me from getting him on. But I know Doug, his real name, pretty well. So I'm trying to get around those people because I'd love to have him come on the show, but I'd love to have him come on as the Grease Man instead of just regular Doug, because that's what I think people miss. They miss that nostalgia of this crazy visual. I mean, the name itself just conjures up these visuals. For a long time, he did his shows. He wouldn't allow himself to be photographed or the news crews to take pictures of him, because you were thinking, what does the Grease Man look like? You know, and he had all these crazy, you know, like Wolfman. You know, you think Wolfman, you think of some guys like the Wolfman. They didn't want to be seen because they want to use that theater of the mind to explode that. And Grease did that as well as anybody. I think he's been kicked off a few radio stations for doing it a little too well. But he was very clever. That was the thing, cleverness. And I can't off the top of my head think of that there's any big personalities right now that are pushing in the radio that are super clever and interesting to listen to. Alex, do you have any suggestions? Because I'm a loss.
I don't. But you know, I just remember, and I don't know who to give credit to. It might have been the Larry and Willing show. It might have been somebody else. But it was either on CFox or maybe it was on Rock 101. But they had this segment, and I'm not sure this would fly now. But they had this segment where people would call in, and the topic of the call-in show was called things that come out of orifices that should not be coming out of orifices. And so people would call in giving the most disgusting stories. Like, I just feel like, and that was 25, 30 years ago, and I just feel like now in 2025, is any station owner going to want to do that? I thought it was absolutely hilarious, but I don't know if anybody would want that now.
Says the guy that asked me to clean up my act here on chat.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going a little too far, I guess, for Alex's tendencies. But go ahead, Mark.
It's also about the demo. So there's one up and coming news talker, Rob Carson, and Rob Carson used to be the comedy writer on the Rush Limbaugh show, and so now he's got his own talk show, and he's coming up and getting a lot of listeners because he's combining the political shows and the political talk with comedy skits that he writes to make light of what's going on in politics today. So he's an interesting one that's coming up.
I used to have a segment on my show called Alive or Dead, and I'd mention an actor or a famous person. I go, Fred Gwynn, alive or dead? Okay, guys, anybody?
I don't know who that is.
Fred Gwynn, Herman Munster, alive or dead?
Okay, I know Herman Munster. Yeah,
Is he
Unfortunately, he's
alive
passed
or
away.
dead?
He passed
I'd say
away.
he's dead.
He's dead. I mean, he's alive. He's dead. He's both. He's also the guy who
Shortly-
was in My Cousin
Right.
Vinny.
I think he passed away right after it.
Yeah, I think it was too much for him, too much popularity. He had a pig farm in Maryland, believe it or not. I had a friend that had a car dealership, and he was down in Maryland, and Fred Gwynn used to come in tracking pig shit. Can I say that, Alex? Pig shit into the...
Go ahead.
I'm going to have to check with you from now on. Into the dealership, and he was like, as a farmer, he was into the stuff. But anyhow, yeah, all kinds of crazy little wild things. One of the guys that started that morning zoo concept was Scott Shannon. He'd be an interesting guest to have on. Scott was the big guy at Z100 in New York when they went from worst to first. It's a station that came on the air. I think it was a mall right station back then, and they claimed that they were coming from high atop the Empire State Building, but they just had an attitude, and they were funny, and they did stuff to people. It just took the wind out of the sails of the classic Cousin Brucey radio characters that were out there. All right, I've had my say. Mark, more questions, please.
We have a lot more questions here. How will podcasting change over the next decade?
I don't think it'll be as easy to monetize because first of all, the metadata to track it to see if it's good. I think a lot of advertisers that make the big decisions at the big houses are scratching their heads saying, is it really worth that much money that we spend on that? So I think they're tightening their grip on that a little bit.
Yeah, I have my own thoughts, but I want to hear from Mark because he raised his hand before I go into this.
Well, I think the interesting challenge is that prior to digital, you used to have a license, and there were only so many licenses, whether it was TV or radio, that they could let out to lease or to purchase because of interference between the different stations. So now that has been almost, done away with by the digital, and anybody being able to get a microphone, set up a podcast, and to do it. So that the real interesting thing is going to be how talented people are going to have to be to get heard, because it's going to come back down to the content and the ability to get a listener's attention to be able to really perform well and grab an audience. That's going to be the challenge. There's going to be so many available things to listen to, there won't be enough hours in the day.
Yeah, and one thing I've continually heard over the last couple of years is, because I'm a big fan of what Leo Laporte does over at Twit. I mean, Twit has some of MacBreak Weekly is not only, I think, the oldest running Apple tech podcast, but I mean, that network he started that 18, 19, almost 20 years ago. So obviously before podcasts were even called podcasts, and Leo's being very open about saying, of all the challenges they've had with advertisers, and advertisers continue to want more data. They're looking for ROI, which I understand, but it's like, look, once somebody clicks on a link, I mean, after that, it's like there's nothing that you can do, right? If somebody decides they don't want to buy something, and the reality is that there just isn't that much data. We don't know that much about the people that are listening to podcasts. So naturally, they, people like him and his organization, they've tried to shift where they make their money. They're trying to shift it to a subscription model. Now they're not paywalling anything necessarily, but if you don't want ads, if you want to support what they do, you have to give them $7 a month, which I am happy to do. And they have a certain stretch goal that they need to get to for subscriptions before they can completely get rid of advertisers. But it's very, very clear that the writing's on the wall, and that a lot of advertisers just don't want to advertise on podcasts because they don't have the data that they are asking for, and that's a problem. And I'm not saying that I think smaller organizations will continue to support podcasts, but I think some of the bigger ones, they're being a lot more conservative with where they're choosing to spend their money.
Next question.
Our next question is, would you agree that radio was an early form of social media before the internet?
Answer is yes. Because where else could you gather together with other people when there was no other communication other than going to school or being in a crowd of people? Could you get that? And everybody, I think, essentially wants to know: am I dressed well? Is my language appropriate? Do I seem unusual and different? You got that from your crazy morning DJs or personalities. You just have to think back. What would it be like if you couldn't go on the internet? There wasn't internet. There were chat rooms eventually, and then the internet sort of filled in. It used to dial up through CompuServe to have these conversations, and I sort of embraced that in the beginning and got chances to speak in rooms where there were people like-minded that we could share information with. But before that, as a radio DJ, you had to be well-versed in, what is hip, essentially.
Well, not
Anybody
only
else?
that. No, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I think that radio is very different. I think in the sense from a communal social aspect, I think you're right in that. I think there's limited things I can say about this because for me, my perspective is very different because although back in the 90s, everybody listened to radio, everyone in elementary school and high school, they were all being influenced by their favorite pop star, their favorite rock star, their favorite hip hop artist, right? Because Much Music and MTV, that was a thing. So I think it was very, very different. But I think my suspicion is that you're probably right because on the radio, you would, sometimes with your family too, you'd sit around the radio and listen to what was happening, and you would go to work or go to school and you would talk about what you heard on the radio because you get news from there, and they would talk about, it was an entertainment program too. So you talk a lot about that kind of thing. So I think there's some aspects of that are you can draw some comparisons there for sure. I mean, what was it like for both of you when you were growing up? I'm talking in, when way before MTV and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you obviously listened to the radio with your family, you listened to it by yourself. Did you talk about it? Did you with friends and with coworkers of what was going on? Like what was happening in the world or something funny they said? Was that ever a thing?
Yeah, there was no other place to be exposed to it. And as you said, the music of the time would influence, the speech patterns, the vernacular, the music you listen to. The only place you could get it, exposed to it, unless you went out and just bought everything, was listening to your local radio station. So if some song came on that inspired you to react to something, you would chat with your friends about it, and then you'd go to the Woolco or local record store and you'd buy the 45 or the album, and you got to discuss it. Like I remember getting super excited with my friends when Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band came out. It wasn't just a record with songs on it; it was a masterpiece. And even the artwork and the notes inside the album was something that we shared and we got excited about. So there wasn't any social media back then where we could share. We had to do it personally or be exposed to it from TV and radio and things like that.
When I grew up, I was the clicker, and TV was black and white. You had to listen to radio.
We loved it.
Get up and change the channel. Click, click, click. You had 3 channels. Most cities only had 3 channels on TV. You had a lot of stations, but you only had 3 channels.
Even when I was growing up in the 80s, I mean, we grew up on a TV, and it was already older at the time. There was no remote control. There was just a round dial, limited number of channels. You'd have to get up off the couch, and you click, click, click to change the channel.
Yeah, but
right? So
Bill Maher did a whole bit on this. He was saying he wants to get back to TV because you used to be able to change the channel and it'd be like a 1 second. You'd go push the button previous or next, and it would instantly change to the next channel. Today, if you're watching on YouTube TV, you got to go to this screen and then you go back to here and then you got to go to the NFL.
There's a lot of fiddling.
There's a lot of fiddling around. It's like the days of just click, 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 click. You could step through 200 stations.
I want to talk about a little bit about the whole communal aspect, the social aspect of discovering new music. Obviously, you would discover new music on the radio and talk about it with friends. And before vinyl went out of popularity and they stopped actually making it, you'd go to the record shop, you'd talk about it. You knew everybody at the record shop, and that's actually still the case for me. But you would talk to people about new music. And one of the things that I love to do with one of my best friends is, because we both collect vinyl, is oftentimes when he comes over, he'll come over with like 2 crates of records that I've never heard. He always brings stuff that I've never listened to, and we'll just sit down, we'll listen to the music, put it on, and I'm looking at the liner notes and we're talking about it. His knowledge about music history always blows me away, and I always learn stuff from him, and I love that. And that's not an experience that a lot of people really have anymore. And I love that social communal aspect of just talking about music and having something physical in my hands.
I remember when Woodstock came out, and at school we had a lot of conversations about that, because the first time we got exposed to it was when the album was released. And then it was the idea of this, it was the concept of all these musicians getting together, and we talked about it. And we'd be sitting at the lounge just sharing liner notes and talking about the artists that were performing, and Jimi Hendrix playing the national anthem on his guitar. I mean, all those little things like that. So those were the days. It was a different way to communicate. So
but even
Mark,
today,
go ahead.
even today in smaller markets, when we have talk radio, we've got so many. I mean, we go through a lot of callers during our shows. They call in to talk about things, and many of them know each other, so they'll direct comments at the other callers back and forth. So it becomes today, I mean, it still is social media to some extent.
It's like Weekend Update. Jane, you ignorant slut, or whatever.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. They would get
they don't-
beeped.
That's right. Do you run a delay on those people? Do you still require it to? Okay.
We have to.
Now, we used to have a hard time with that because we had a piece of tape and a loop, and it would run, even at WFIL. That's how we did our delays.
It's changed since then.
Yeah, you hit a dump button, and then it builds the dump back up. And anyhow, it's very technical.
Okay, next
continuing
question?
With the questions. Yep.
Yeah, okay. How can radio be more interactive? I think we touched on this a little bit just recently, but I think radio is interactive when it's news talk, at least because all the people calling in and talking about it, and even overnight radio. Listen to overnight radio sometimes. I mean, it's very interactive.
Hi, this is Bob from Lickskillet, Alabama. I just want to comment on the point you made about January 6th. I think that it's everybody's right to be able to go in and steal things that we paid for out of our tax stuff. Anyhow, yeah, some of the conversationalists are entertainment unto themselves. So that's a good thing about it. So, next question. Unless Alex wants to jump in.
Wait a minute, Alexander, do you want to jump in? No, you don't want to touch that?
Don't touch that one, buddy.
Okay.
Yeah, those
the last
damn
question that
Canadians
I
up
see
there,
right
what are they-
now is, can media companies that own radio stations use the same methods of advertising for podcast and live streaming?
God, I hope not.
Why?
They've screwed up radio enough. Why should they get their hands into podcasting? Hey, look, here's the thing about podcasting. It's like a First Amendment right. It's like anybody can do it. The tools are there. Anybody, any one of you people that are watching this can have their own podcast for whatever reason. They don't have to have a lot of money to do it. So it's your right and freedom to be able to do that. Now, that might change somewhere down the road. But I think that it's popular because you can do it. You have a chance. Everybody
I think
does.
what's really screwing up podcasting is dynamically inserted ads. So for those that don't know, sometimes you listen to a podcast and an ad will come on and it is They try to be hyper local because what they're doing is they're detecting where you are. They'll try to insert an ad that will try to be more relevant to you, but I could not be less interested in they're just so impersonable. It drives me crazy. The ads that I respond to way more is when the host, who I have an existing relationship with, reads that ad,
Live read.
and it's a product that they actually have used and vetted. I am way more likely to pay attention and give my money to that product than I would some random inserted ad, which drives me crazy.
Well,
it's like
geo.
Paul Harvey. He was a
geo-targeting.
genius at it.
Yeah, geo-targeted, exactly.
Geo-targeting versus a live read.
But the guy mixing the conversation into an ad, and it just flawlessly moves into the ad talking about the Brill cream or whatever it is.
Okay, so why isn't that done anymore? Why don't you hear people doing that?
Well,
because
there's a
it's,
couple reasons why you don't hear people doing it. Number one, it's live. And for most of your music stations, you might have, and Mitch can correct me if I'm wrong, but you'll have the announcer come in for an hour out of a 3-hour show and record the whole show, the 1 hour that he's there. And so then he or she leaves. He can't really do any live reads except for the first hour. Right, Mitch?
Yeah, it's you're talking about voice tracking. It's a way that they save money. They'll have a talent that'll do like 4 radio stations, and he'll spend a half an hour voice tracking. And what it just means is that he does all the little talk points between the songs and the commercials in advance, and they're like 10, 15 seconds a pop. And then it gets sucked into their computer system at their corporate headquarters, and then it sounds like it's being played back as a continuous 1, 2, 3 hour show. So, yeah, that takes a little bit of the fun out of it. There's nothing better than the fear and the energy and the gestalt of being on a live show like we are right now, knowing that if you say something or do something, that people are going to react to it in a positive or a negative way, as opposed to, recording. I couldn't record this conversation out in the vacuum of a studio because I can't anticipate the context of the conversation or the circumstances
It's more
of the
authentic.
conversation. Yeah, it's
much
very
more
authentic. So, I like that much better. Alex?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's I just feel like the more look, I realize there are valid business reasons why people do voice tracking. You mentioned cost, and look, the current state of the industry, everybody's trying to save money, but I just feel like it's really sucking the soul out of radio, and I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if there is a solution on the horizon for that. All I'm saying is I would much rather hear somebody read it live, but clearly that sounds like that's a tough problem to solve because a lot of people are just doing the voice tracking, which, by the way, I didn't realize.
Yeah, it's voice tracked. And the other thing that takes away from it is the fact that you've got a small number of owners owning a large number of stations. So they don't have the resources across the country to get into the local communities and really promote those local businesses. And so it's the small mom and pop radio stations that are branding these businesses and helping them grow. And that makes a huge difference. You have a lot less of this going on in the small towns.
They feel the economies of scale work in their corporate favor, and sometimes it does.
Here's one question I want to pose to both of you. This just popped in my head, and I don't know if there's any examples that you can think of people doing this, but would it be possible to maybe have create a not-for-profit organization that could run a radio station that way you wouldn't necessarily be so anxiety driven by just the bottom line, that you could find ways of funding it where you can really do things where you really serve the community and you really do live things that can promote the community and have people not do voice tracking and be there live and do the ad reads and really feel connected to the audience.
Sounds like NPR to me.
I think let me rephrase the question for you. Are there passionate owners left in radio that want to help the communities? Because whether you're nonprofit or not really makes no difference. You can a nonprofit company just can't make it, still can make money. It just can't treat it as profit. So it's still, it has to turn all that money back into itself. Whereas a for-profit company can make that money and pay the owners of the station. But so I don't think the ownership, how it's formed or how it's organized matters. It's about the passion of being part of that community and helping that community grow and communicate with each other and being a platform where everybody can have a discussion.
Right. Okay. And Mark, if you were to start over right now, is there one thing that you would change? Is there one thing that you would do differently that you feel comfortable saying?
I'm sorry, did this question get vetted? I didn't see it in the question system.
No, I'm asking on the fly, but if you don't want to answer, that's fine.
No, is there anything? Of course, there are many things I would do differently, but we are where we are, and we just move forward and try and do the best we can. I mean, we're doing pretty well, and we are becoming a big name for ourselves, and a lot of it's because we're changing some of the technologies to make radio more interactive.
There you go. Well, that concludes our question segment of the program. We did things a little bit differently. If you're just tuning in a little bit later, we had some technical hoo-has that happened that we worked through it. But the show must go on, and here we are doing the show anyhow. And in the interest of what I've always said is let's keep it real. We don't mind saying, hey, we got a technical problem here, or help us out with this, or help us out with that. But what we do have is 50 shows, counting this one, since we started almost a year ago. And it's a major milestone for a program that had a crazy name, The Last Angry DJ, and continues to be supported by our faithful listeners, viewers, etc., asking questions, making comments, telling me to shut up once in a while or stop the sound effects. It's all part of the fun of doing this program, and we will continue to do it. What we do ask, and it's not much, and we know some of you out there haven't done it yet, is to punch that subscribe button that's there. There's a subscribe, and doing that, in addition to giving us a little tiny jolt of endorphins, allows us to be recognized by the powers that be at YouTube and other places as a more interesting program. Maybe we'll get to a point where we're monetized, maybe not. We don't have any expectations, therefore we can't be disappointed. But the thing that's so important is to have your interaction and your input. And we appreciate you doing that. And once again, Alex is going to give you his little spiel about how do you reach out and touch us in so many different ways. Ooh.
Yeah, and Mitch already mentioned one of the ways that you contribute, which we would sincerely appreciate, whether you subscribe in YouTube or if you prefer an audio version of this show to listen to on your morning commute or while you're doing the dishes, whatever. You can find The Last Angry DJ on any podcast platform that includes Apple Podcasts, Google, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify. You can ask your smart device to play the podcast. It'll play it as well. So that's another way that you can support the show as well. Share it with a friend. Tell your coworkers if you like the show. And also another way you can support the show is by joining our Discord community. I apologize, I don't have a QR code to show you right now. A lot of you, most of you in the chat right now are already there, so we appreciate it there. And you can also chat with us in Discord and let us know about future topics, things you want us to cover, things you want us to talk about on future episodes. Please drop a comment there. You can also send us an email by emailing hello@thelastangrydj.com. And of course, we're on all platforms, social media as well, under the same exact name. One last thing, because I keep forgetting to mention it, patreon.com/thelastangrydj. If you want to show your support with actual dollars, you can, for $2 a month, become what we call a coffee supporter.
Yes.
And that is another way that we would appreciate you. Thank you very much. And thanks to all that have stuck around from the beginning or near the beginning that have watched the show. We made it to episode 50. We're going to do a lot more than 50, so thank you again.
Yeah, do you find that sometimes technology or people or something conspires to smack you down and make you not want to do the show? I don't feel that way, But Alex, you wrestle with the technical details.
No,
and
when
today
you
was
do it-
certainly a challenging
When you
program.
work with technology, a lot of complex technology, and you do it for a very long time, you realize that there really is no personal vendetta. They're not being vindictive. Computers are computers. Unfortunately, we have very complex systems, and any little change can really, it becomes like the snowball effect, rolling down the hill, becoming bigger and bigger, and eventually just, ends up causing a lot of damage. So I think what can happen sometimes is just something very, very simple that wreaks havoc on your system, and you can't take it personally, and you just have to figure out ways to get through and push forward, which we obviously did today. We were a little late, but we managed to at least have a show. It wasn't at 4K, but it didn't have fancy graphics, but we had a show. So, and some of you still showed up.
Has that fancy Zoom logo in the corner.
I really wish the logo wasn't there, but what are you going to do?
Me too. And I'd like to make a little commentary, maybe anecdotal. When I first thought of doing this podcast, it was based on people telling me, Mitch, you need to have a podcast. If anything else, just to keep you occupied so you're out there creating havoc on the internet, social media. But I was reluctant to do it because I just didn't think that I had anything to contribute to the whole podcasting universe. And the idea of the Last Angry DJ, I have to give credit to my friend Tom Shustak, who said, "Oh, you're doing a podcast. You're going to call it the Last Angry DJ?" And I said, "Oh, that sounds like an interesting name." And the thing that is the most gratifying about doing a podcast is first our viewers and listeners, people asking questions, and also the people that raised their hands and wanted to be involved. There's a lot of people that are involved to make this thing happen, and I'm amazed at how large our family has grown from the beginning, from just Alex and myself and Mark, that it is now a community that makes this thing possible. And for the first time, I'm going to roll a credit roll that's about 50 seconds long of all the people that are involved. Alex and I have been working on this, and the music that's underneath it is something that Alex shared with me. And before I do this, Alex, one of the songs, I don't know if it's cleared for broadcast or not, A Girl Under You or something like that.
Oh, it should be. It should be.
It should be cleared. Okay. So we're going to wrap this program up with our new credit roll. So you get a chance to see the people that are involved and hear a very loud and cool theme song that's picked out by Alex. So thank you. Good night. And we'll see you next time.